Okay, everybody, this is Sheets, and I'm going to be doing the New Year's Eve review for the NBA slates today. I'm going to try to do both the early slate and the late slate. I'm probably going to do it in two separate videos, though. I want to wait a little longer before some news comes in for the main slate. But I do want to do something for the early slate, and I'm going to do both FanDuel and DraftKings. I'm probably going to squeeze them both into this one video. And I just want to go over how I approach small slates a little differently than the big slates. Where I kind of lied. In previous videos, I said that I approach all slates the same in that I look for games that are going to be with high totals, low, well projected players on both sides that are close, that I can maybe get some overtime vig. Yes, that is true, and that is still true. But the problem is with two-game slates, you're not really differentiating yourself that much by doing that. I mean, a lot of people are doing that only because they're only two games. So people are, trying everything. You know what I mean? So it's not that easy to get that kind of an edge simply from correlating. And likewise, I'm not as stingy about my groupings when it comes to playing these two-game slates. Like if there was a really big slate, I might not want to play Anthony Davis and LeBron James together, things like that, where in big slates I will be very, very, very intelligent about the rules I put in as far as that goes. But with two-game slates, it's kind of more of a, the Wild West, and you just want to just get the most points possible. However, okay, what I will be a real stickler for is ownership, because in a two-game slate, you don't want to be tying with 1,000 people. You have to find some way to be different. So if you can fade ownership in any legitimate way, it's a really, really excellent place to start. Let's put it that way. So the first thing that I do with a two-game slate is approach it this way. What you'll hear when you get down to these shorter slates from 5 to 4 to 3 game slates is the term, well, raw points matter. And you'll hear that. You won't hear that too often in the 15 game slates, but you will hear it from a lot of providers and experts when you hear about 2 game slates. And the idea being that if one player projects just so much higher than everybody else, that it really doesn't matter what his value is per se, because you're just going to need to get those points. Like if you find 8 guys all project for 7x. Pause this for just a second. Sorry about that. Someone calling about my photocopier, which doesn't exist. So, so when it comes to raw points matters, if one guy projects to be that much higher than everybody else, it doesn't matter if you can find 8 guys that all are, say, 3K that project to be 7x, because you're just not going to get enough points to win the slate. So the first thing I always do with these small slates is take who is that guy who projects to be the highest projected scorer, and especially when he projects to be the highest projected scorer by a decent amount, and run optimals with that guy in and then with that guy out, just to make sure that I don't need him regardless of what value is. You know what I mean? So in a slate like this, when I look at projections, I do see that Joel Embiid rates to be the highest projected scorer by about 5 to 10 points, depending on where you look. And so what I'll do is I'll run an optimal just to see how often he shows up, or what the drop-off is if you go to the first lineup without him in it, just to make sure that he's not a guy you just have to play regardless of ownership and regardless of, well, not regardless of ownership, but regardless of value per se. So that's the first thing that I do. And the good news is that you don't have to play Joel Embiid to get the most points. Let's put it that way. I'm not saying he's not a good play. We'll get to that in a minute. But so that's the first thing that you'll do with these 2 game slates, is to figure out if it's one of those, raw points matter type of slates, which means that you don't have to worry too much about value, especially at the top. But fortunately, it's not one of those slates apparently, and you can, fade guys like that if in fact you are you can replace those points, so to speak. So what I am going to do, the way I'm going to attack this slate, again, I'm trying to find ownership gaps and trying to find pivot points and things like that. I'm going to start with Joel Embiid because he is projected to be the highest scorer, and he's also projected to be the highest owned player on the slate at this particular point, okay? So he's going to be about 50% owned or so, and I'm not surprised. I mean, in the center position, you have to play one. The options are not that great, but what I look at here is there are, in the center position, there are 1, 2, 3, really only 5 centers you could play. And of the 5 centers, Joel Embiid is projected to be about 50% owned. And the other 4 centers are all kind of getting equalish type ownership of maybe 11% each, something like that. And of those, at least the projections I'm looking at, Enes Kanter projects to be the best from a value perspective of those other 4 between Biyombo and Zeller and Turner. So what I will start by doing is my first attempt to get leverage here is play Kanter in this lineup. Now, again, I'm going to be probably playing like 25 lineups. So what I'm going to do is probably create a core and then kind of deviate off of that. But I think this is a good way to start getting leverage because, you know, Embiid is the top projected scorer and, top projected owned player. And from a value perspective, Kanter projects to be pretty freaking close, okay? Not on a raw points level, but from a value perspective, he does. And maybe just as important, he projects to be a better value than the other 3 guys with similar ownership to him. So I think that this is actually a good place to start is by putting Kanter into this lineup build. Now, what you have to be careful of is when you keep replacing guys based on value, that you do fill out your salary cap, because what you run the risk of doing is, again, having 9 good value plays who project to score 75% of the points needed to win, right? So you have to just make sure that you're not going too crazy with just taking value plays. So the next position that I wanted to go to is going to be the power forward position. Now, again, we're not going game by game here because, again, it's just a 2-game slate, and these guys are going to project the way they project. Both games are pretty, I guess I would say similar, but look, the Philly-Indiana game is going to be closer, yet and the Boston-Charlotte game is going to be probably a similar total. So I guess if you had to pick a game that'd be more competitive, maybe it'd be the Indiana game, but it's not that big of a deal. Like, one game does not have that much, greater significant values than the other, nor does it correlate that much better than the other. So it's just going to be a test of picking the best plays and seeing if you could fade ownership in an intelligent way. So at the power forward position, again, I'm just starting with the ownership here. I'm looking at and again, if your ownership numbers are different, that's fine. Again, it's more important that you learn how to do this than for me to be actually right on this particular slate, right? I know that's what you want. Just tell us, what you're playing. But again, it's the process that's more important than anything else. So when I'm looking at my ownership projections as far as the power forwards, there are 2 guys that rate to be about 50-ish% owned, and that's going to be the top scorers actually also, Sabonis and Tatum. So there's a gap in ownership to the next guy, and what I'm going to look at is from a value perspective how these guys all rank. And what I'm looking at here is that the 5 main guys, Sabonis, Tatum, P.J. Washington, Tice, and Horford, they all rate to be pretty close with respect to value from a points per dollar perspective. I mean, you could maybe argue that P.J. Washington might be slightly better on a points per dollar basis, but then Tatum makes up for that in terms of raw points. So considering that all 5 of these guys are going to be very similar, what I'm inclined to do is start by tossing Tatum and Sabonis out of my first power forward spot and replacing him with probably the best combination of value and raw points. And that's going to end up being Al Horford. I mean, he projects, and all these guys are projecting very similarly from a value perspective, But that gap in ownership from 50 to 30 between, these top two guys in Horford is very significant if you're going to start this kind of core off like this. And if you can get away with pivoting and going low owned with all these guys, that's obviously ideal. The other good thing about putting Horford in is it is kind of a natural pivot off of Embiid, sort of, because you're hoping that Horford gets more of those rebounds than Embiid would have gotten and things like that. So I think if you put Horford in, that's actually a pretty good place to start the power forward position. Now, what I'm trying to do is kind of make these cores kind of like go through here so that then I could filter in the rest of these, with other kind of wildish, upside-ish type plays, knowing that I at least have a kind of low-owned start or lower-owned start to this whole thing. So when you go to small forward, all right, and you'll see I do this with FanDuel. I just do it differently than DraftKings, especially on the two-game slate. When you go to small forward, there is a guy that's standing out as far as value goes. So let me see if he's going to be standing out also with respect to ownership. Let me just look really, really quickly. Let's see. FanDuel. Sorry that I went back to the other site really, really quick. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Sorry about this. So small forward. Right. So there are actually 2 small forwards that are kind of tied as far as ownership goes, both rate to be about 50%. And that's going to be Gordon Hayward and Tobias Harris. But here's the deal. Hayward, at least what I'm looking at, is projecting to be a significantly better value from a, points per dollar perspective than is going to be Tobias Harris. So I am inclined to toss Tobias Harris, at least in this main build, and put in Gordon Hayward, okay? So you have an equal ownership between these two guys, but one guy projects better. That's going to be the guy you're going to want to put in. So again, it's not always just about taking the low-owned guys, but taking guys that are similarly owned with one guy projecting that much better. What's going to be interesting is that Tobias is going to project very similarly as far as a value perspective to a guy who's much lower owned than he is. And just to confirm that, that's going to be someone like TJ Warren. Okay. Now, again, it's not going to be that big a deal because it's not like TJ Warren's going to be low owned. He's probably going to be still 25%, but it's certainly going to be lower owned than Tobias Harris. So, for now, I'm going to put him in. And again, this has the additional benefit. Again, this is not the 100% thing you want to do, but of avoiding Tobias Harris and Al Horford together. Again, that's not the priority. The priority is not avoiding those groups and grouping these things, but it's certainly an unintended benefit of taking the lower owned guy. So let's put in TJ Warren in here. Now, the next place I want to go, just because I think it's going to help us shape this build, well, let's go to the guard position. I think you can do this all at the same time. So at the point guard position, right, this is, again, where you have a little bit of a gap in ownership versus value. So right now it looks as though the highest projected owned player from a point guard perspective is going to be Ben Simmons. As a matter of fact, he's actually projected to be similarly owned as Embiid. So, if he does not project well from a value perspective, you could fade him pretty liberally. He's kind of tied with Kemba Walker for being, that 50% owned point guard. And then there's kind of a drop between these other guys like Brogdon, Aaron Holiday, TJ McConnell. And what's interesting to me is that when I look at my projections, it's really Malcolm Brogdon who's projecting to be the better value. So again, not saying that my projections are perfect, or not saying that yours are, not saying that ownership levels are perfect. But if you are going to be relying on those in some way or making your own or whatever, this is the type of analysis you should go through is don't fall in love with plays, fall in love with, or fall in like with relationships between projections and ownership. So if you are, whatever systems you use, come up with a guy who is the highest projected from a value perspective player who is not the highest owned, that's just going to be someone you're going to have to play. So Malcolm Brogdon, it just gets inserted in as probably the best play to kind of start this whole thing anyway. So we're already kind of building a lineup which, although these are all good plays, is already by its nature a little bit contrarian, because we're already throwing out the highest owned point guard, that being Simmons, and the highest owned player or center, that being Embiid. Now, we could go ahead and put Simmons in if it works, if we can get lower owned guys later. But to be honest, why would I want to do that? I mean, if I don't have to, he's not projected to be such a great value play. So if I can get away with not playing him and still get those, quote unquote, raw points, that I'm inclined to do that. So heading back to the shooting guard position, see, this is where it becomes kind of a war. All right. So at the shooting guard position, first of all, from a projection perspective, it all kind of stinks. Okay. From a value perspective, there's nobody that really projects that well relative to their price tag on FanDuel. Okay. At this position. So what I'm going to be inclined to do is be very liberal with what type of guy I play at this position. So the first thing I'll look at, again, I'll go look at ownership first, and I will see that Devontae Graham is 54% or 50%, which places him at the highest projected owned player in that position. So what I'd be inclined to do is kind of get rid of him, right? So I already see where we're headed here, because if you continue to do this, you're going to end up with nothing but kind of, good pivots, yet you might not end up with enough points. So let's kind of see where we end up, and then we could go ahead and, fill in kind of chalkier guys, because we might end up needing those points. But for now, let's see who we want to put in. So from the shooting guard position, it's going to be between guys like Josh Richardson. These guys are all kind of tied as far as value goes. Josh Richardson, Marcus Smart, Malik Monk, Jeremy Lamb. So which of these guys you want to put in? Again, just to break the tie, let's put in the guy who's going to not eat into other guys' production. So let's, instead of putting in Lamb, who is going to eat into Warren's production, let's put in Richardson, who's not going to eat into Horford's. So we're moving along here. So we have 3 guys left, and here's the problem. You really do want to fill in this salary, okay? And you want to get these raw points. So how do we do that? Well, let's go back to these guys that we kind of, got rid of for the time being, and let's see what happens if we put them in. So at the power forward position, let's go back and put Sabonis in, for example. Okay. Let's go back and put in Graham. Okay. And let's go back and put in Simmons. What that does is that, I don't want to say zero outs our salary, right? And it is kind of important to get close to your salary, especially when there's no real standout values, because otherwise, again, you're really running the risk of not getting enough raw points, okay? So what we ended up doing after going through this analysis is not de-chalkifying the lineup all that much. All we ended up doing is, honestly, let's take a look at this. I'm going to sort this now by just pure ownership. And as I do that, I see that Embiid was 62%. what this is doing is actually not bad. This throws out Embiid, who was 60%. It throws out Tatum, who was 50%. And it throws out Kemba Walker, who was at 50% also. And it also throws out Tobias Harris, who's at 45%. So even though this does have some degree of chalk, because look, you can't fade every bit of it, especially if you want to get those points. This does at least, fade some of the more chalky plays, and yet still it fills out your salary where you know that you're probably going to get enough raw points to make that work, okay? One other really interesting, not that interesting, but if you want to get really deep into narrative street here, what I do think a lot of people are going to do on this slate is play either Kemba Walker, because he is going to be going into Charlotte. So the revenge narrative might get a little bit of traction. And, he certainly projects pretty well also, so I'm not going to argue with it. And also the Terry Rozier playing against Boston, he's going to get some kind of narrative discussion also. So maybe he gets a little extra ownership. And again, I would make that same argument. Listen, on a 2-game slate, I'll give narrative street a little bit of a bigger boost, but not when you're going to make an already chalky guy even chalkier. So this type of build, avoiding both of the revenge guys, does carry, again, we're looking for any little edge here, right? So it's not like the end of the world. But this is, I think, definitely a good way to start. So what I would do is I would take something like this, and boom, we save changes, okay? And do I have all this in all my lineups? Let me see, because what I did, I'll show you. No, I didn't do it, right? So what I want to do is I want to change all of these, because I have this in 26 lineups. I want it to be all of this. So I want this to be my core. So we want to change this again? So let's change this. So just to see what it looks like. So we're going to edit the lineup, and let's see if we can remember what it was, right? Anybody remember what this was? All right, so what we're going to do again, so we're going to have as our point guards, we're going to put in, what do we say, Brogdon and Simmons. Shooting guard, we were going to put in Devonta Graham, and I even forgot who it was already. We'll get back to it in a second. I know we're going to put Cantor here. See if I can do this without cheating. I don't even remember who I had already, without even looking back. Just one freaking lineup. I don't remember who I have. So who do we put in as a small forward? Oh, we have Richardson, right, as the shooting guard. And then the small forward, TJ Warren, right? Okay. TJ Warren. Okay. So we do is we save all 26 entries. And then what I will do is then I will go through each one of these guys and find, different ways to pivot off of all these dudes. So kind of high upside guys to pivot off. And there are going to be some lineups where what I'll do is I'll go in and I will use Simmons, okay? And if I will use Simmons, then what I have to then do is definitely take out Sabonis and definitely probably take out Simmons as well. So that is the way that I would kind of approach, from a FanDuel perspective, this type of slate, is make little kind of pivots kind of along the way, and just make sure, again, you don't get too crazy with just taking these value plays for the purposes of being different, because you end up with not enough salary use, meaning not enough projected points, okay? So, for example, let's say that I wanted to differentiate a little bit. I guess may as well go over some of kind of the higher upside type plays that, again, they don't project all that well, but guys you might want to throw in. Do I want to even go down this road? Yeah, why not? So on Philly, I mean, I've really talked about everybody. I mean, I wouldn't go down to guys like James Ennis or Kirk Maz or anything like that. So I really wouldn't add anybody to the player pool that I haven't really talked about already. On the Pacers, maybe you could have some fun. So on the Pacers, I could certainly make a case for TJ McConnell. actually a little sneaky revenge, right, against Philadelphia. He's someone, again, who projects kind of crappy also, but, you know, he's a guy you could use to pivot and a guy to kind of diversify your lineup who's not going to kill you. Well, he could kill you. Jeremy Lamb, as we went over before, he's a guy he's probably going to be a little too chalky, but he's a guy that you can put in your less chalky lineups. Another guy, Justin Holiday, at the shooting guard position. You could go to him if you wanted to. Actually, small forward, you can go to him. Guys on the Boston side I didn't go over. Daniel Tice, I do like. He's kind of an okay power forward. He can go well with with that other power forward that I didn't go over from Charlotte. What's his name? PJ Washington. As a matter of fact, PJ Washington is actually, just so you guys know, is projected to be probably the best value per se, like right now, on the slate with respect to this position. So what you would want to do with someone like that is you put him in if you want to then go ahead and move up to Embiid, right? So you put in Embiid in this build, okay? Because you don't want to have Horford and Embiid maybe in the same lineup. And then what you could do, then you could drop off of Simmons again. Because, again, you really don't want to have Simmons and him in the same lineup if you can get away with it. So, like here, for example, you could already, like, kind of have some fun. Like, you could play maybe, you know, T.J. McConnell over here, okay? Now you have 1,600 more to spend at the small forward position, and you could see if you could make that work. You could almost get up to Tobias Harris, right? The other thing you could do is go back down here. What you could do, I know what you could do. You could go to Miles Bridges, okay? You go to Miles Bridges here. He's a way you could pivot there, okay? So there are things that you can do, but make sure, again, that you know, you don't get too hung up on the groupings, but if all else is equal, then maybe you can get away with it, okay? Maybe this is one where you can go to Kemba, for example, okay? And you can get up to Harris in this type of build. Now, this is a little trickier because you have Richardson, Harris, and Embiid in the same lineup. So it's not the greatest thing in the world, but, again, 2-game slate, you know, let's take a shot. All right, so that's the way I'm looking at FanDuel. I want to pause for just a second and then pull up DraftKings and see if the preview looks a little different. All right, so when it comes to DraftKings, it's just kind of the way the ownership and projections are working out for today. But it seems as though there's actually a little bit of a bigger gap between some of these plays on DraftKings as opposed to the way it was on FanDuel. So in a way, all right, I'm kind of getting to that. And again, this is the way you should look at these types of analyses. So again, I presume that all of you, when you are, I don't know what level of player you are, but you all have access to some kind of projections. You're not just like going through sites, picking, you know, look at my video and saying, who does Eric like? Look at who Bobby likes or whatever. Just come up with a collection of who people like and plugging them in. I do expect that you at least have subscribed to some site that gives you projections so that you can look through them because, again, I am doing this as of whatever time this is, and projections change and ownership changes and things like that. What I'm trying to get you to do is think about, given the way projections and ownerships kind of go at each other on particular slates, how to approach those types of situations. So in FanDuel today, there was one approach based on the way those two kind of battled each other. DraftKings is just going to be a little bit different. Like, I want you to imagine it this way, and one of these days I'm going to figure out a way to bring these projections in so you can see them, but we're just not quite there yet with respect to getting permission and all that kind of stuff. But so in the Boston game, for example, And what I'm looking at right now, we're going to clear this, is the difference between two guys and the rest of the guys is significant enough where I don't want to say lock these guys in, but make these two guys real priorities on DraftKings. And that's going to be Kemba and Gordon Hayward, okay? Compared to the other guys on Boston who are going to have similar, if not the exact same ownership, I think that there's a big enough gap where you can really prioritize these guys. So like guys like Smart and Tatum were both looking to be about the same 40% owned as Hayward and Walker. One way you could, I don't want to say be different, is to really overweight this Walker Hayward thing and accept the fact that if you do that, you're going to have to take usage away from somebody anyway. So then you can kind of fade Smart and Tatum in doing that. So that is probably the way that I would start with DraftKings based on the combination of projections and ownership. And likewise, we're going to get back to Embiid in a minute. And it's similar when I get to Charlotte. I see both Graham and Rozier are projecting to be very similar with respect to values. And they actually are both looking to be kind of the same with respect to ownership. So what I would do is I would not prioritize one over the other as far as putting them in my lineups. I would put just as much Rozier as Graham. And it's not as if, there's a different, there's correlation problems by playing one of those with Kemba as opposed to the other one. So I really have no strong opinion over which one of those to play. So for now, let's just put the cheaper one in. Let's put in Rozier for now. Okay. And it also becomes a little more difficult because both these guys are small or just point guard eligible. Whereas I think Devontae Graham is going to be both point guard and shooting guard. Is that true or not true? Oh, he's just point guard eligible too. Let me just see something. If Rozier is not just point guard eligible. See, actually, let's do this. Since he is multiple eligible, let's not use him. That could be a way to be different. So let's force the two power point guard positions into these spots and get rid of Rozier. That could be interesting because I know what people think, well, between the two of these guys, Rozier has multiple position eligibility. Why don't I use him instead of Graham? So I think that is one thing you could do if you could, in fact, make the rest of this work, which you should be able to. I mean, you're in a 2-game slate. You're going to have to find some place to jam in here anyway. So let's start with this. Now we might have to come back to the Celtic game in a second, but for now, let's leave it there and let's go back to the Philly game. Let's just see again if Embiid is projecting to be a pretty decent play. Not that he was a bad play on the other side, but he's looking to be a pretty good play here. And let's look at his ownership. As opposed to the 60% he was on FanDuel, he's 50% here, which certainly is not anything great, but we might have to eat that, but maybe not. So let's not put him in yet. The one guy who's still showing up as being lower owned, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So you have to look at this again. But Malcolm Brogdon, again, is looking to be a pretty, a lower owned guy relative to his projections. So he'll be the next guy I put in. Now, unfortunately, I don't want to say unfortunately, he's going to be multi-position eligible also, which is going to probably give him more ownership. So let's put him in anyway. So we're going to have these 1, 2, 3, 4 guys. And if you have these 4 guys, I can tell you right now that it's going to be kind of hard to get Embiid in there. So if you put him in, it becomes very difficult because there isn't that much good 3,900 value here, just kind of looking quickly. Yeah, I mean, the Philly-Indiana game, there's nobody. And then what's his name there? TJ McConnell. He's 4,100 even. If he was 3K, I would try him maybe. And in the other game, the Charlotte game, I guess you could go down to Malik Monk, but that's it. You know what I mean? And if you wanted, you could play Malik Monk and Cody Martin. Like these are the guys that you'd have to put in if you wanted to use Embiid. Okay? So let's just see what that would look like just for the hell of it. If you put in Embiid, and then let's say that you had to use Monk. Yeah, you have to use another one. So you'd have to use Martin and Monk, who would be right around here. I guess you could get away with it. You could put in Cody Zeller or somebody like that. I guess you could make this work. But now you have Graham, who you're banking on him getting good starters minutes, starters run points, and also Cody Martin getting in there. I mean, this is really pushing your luck with respect to correlation. Malik Monk, maybe. So that could be one build if you could find two other kind of 4K guys to put in, but it's going to be difficult. Miles Bridges, 4,500. Then you need a 3,500 guy. If you put in Monk, you need a 4,100 guy. And this slate is very deprived of good 4,100 guys. You want to go to Theis at power forward? Well, we already have Monk in, so we have to find another one. Bridges and this is going to be tough. So if you go with these four guys, it's going to be tough to get Embiid in, which is fine. I mean, again, we did the same analysis here as we did on FanDuel. We ran one with Embiid on Optimal and saw what we were getting, and then we ran one with him, and the drop-off is not that bad, if at all. So it's not as if we have to play Embiid, and at 50% ownership, you don't have to play Embiid anyway, right? So starting with these four guys, now what you have to do is look for guys that are good values, that are at these price points that you can make these work. So let's go back into these games and let's see if we can fill in some of these dudes. So on the Philadelphia side, again, the values are just really, really bad, okay? The best of the given alternatives is going to be, once again, Horford, which, again, it makes a little sense if you're not going to use Embiid to throw Horford in. So let's put him in this lineup also. We might end up having to use him at center, depending on what else we do here. But let's just take a look. On Indiana, the top values aside from Brogdon are going to be, it's going to be Sabonis and then a big drop to these other guys. It would be nice if we could use Sabonis here and get away with it. Now, if we did this, then you don't have to make that big drop to the much worse plays on Indiana. So if you can get away with this with a couple of decent 4K guys, then that could be a way to go. Let me just take a look at a guy really quickly and see. Yeah, so we're back to this Daniel Theis idea at 4,100. Bismack Biyombo, 4,400. Miles Bridges, 4,500. Bridges would be fine at 4,500, but where's the 3,700 guy come from? Well, the 3,700 guys are difficult to find, but you keep coming back to this Malik Monk as a decent $3,900 guy. So if you put him in, then you can go to Theis, and then this works, right? So what we've done in making this kind of shell lineup on DraftKings is, again, what we did is we emphasized Kemba and Hayward. And we also emphasized Brogdon. Now, we had a choice between Graham and Rozier. And what's interesting about it, okay, remember we were talking about, well, let's assign this lineup for now. Let's assign it to all, okay? Then what you could do, check this out. Remember we forced Graham in here as opposed to Rozier? Well, if we then change that to Rozier to 6,300, let's kind of clear the decks again with these other guys. And now let's see what would happen if we tried to get Embiid in. Can you do it just making that one change? If you put Rozier in, now can you get Embiid? Well, having just tinkered around with some of these guys, you already see where I'm going to be headed back to. You might even be able to get up to now guys like Jeremy Lamb. But it looks as though these two plays we kind of fiddle around with are going to keep showing up like in these types of ideas. That being either Miles Bridges, Malik Monk, okay, Daniel Tice. Let's, for the purposes of this one, put in, let's see if we can put in Bridges. Put in Miles Bridges. If we do that, I mean, same deal. You could put in Monk over here, and then you can get up to some of these other guys who are a little bit better. Like you can get up to Jeremy Lamb. You can get up to Cody Zeller. Guys like that. So you could do that. You could then, this is what I'm doing here. I'm doing 15 lineups. So now what I'm doing is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Boom. Actually 9 and 6. So what I'm going to do is then I'm going to keep kind of diversifying off of these guys, probably until I don't have 100% ownership of these three guys. And I'm not going to want to have 100% ownership of Malik Monk. So that's kind of what I'm doing to attack this type of slate is based on that kind of gap between projections and ownership. I found my three guys that kind of are well projected and not as highly owned, that being Brogdon, Hayward, and Kemba. I mean, they're going to be owned, but not as highly owned as some of these others maybe. And this one, we're going to be fading Embiid, which is actually a really big deal, and kind of filling in around it. Now, I do have the sense that both of these might be a little bit chalky just by eyeballing them. So what I'm going to probably have to go in and just kind of make some gross kind of pivots and some gross diversifications, trying to get upside out of this. So again, to go back into these kind of one-offs, these guys that I'll be looking at, on the Philly side, I just don't see much. I would go back to my normal guys like Harris, Simmons, Richardson if I want to spread out a little bit. But there's really no good high upside play that's off the board that I'm kind of looking at. And you know what? Same with Indiana. You could make a case maybe for Miles Turner. The idea being that he'll pull Embiid away from the three-point arc, and Embiid doesn't want to play that far out. So maybe in lineups without Embiid, you could play Miles Turner. That might be an idea. On the Boston side, two guys. One is going to be Enes Kanter, just like we did before, although he's more expensive here, so you got to keep that in mind. But he's someone you could throw in also as kind of your non-Daniel Tice lineups. And the other guy who is kind of gross, but if you want to play some of these, if you want to not use Malik Monk all the time and you want to throw a guy in, we could go with our old favorite, Brad Wanamaker, who is a salary saver all the time. And that allows you to do kind of other things. Like if you did that, you could get up to this P.J. Washington is showing to be a good play, okay, things like that. So Wanamaker is another guy that you can kind of filter in kind of through your lineups. And so here I make this 3 and 3. And what I do is I will keep filtering down and down and down until probably all three of those top guys are not 100% owned. And Malik Monk probably gets to be, either 50% owned or less. And the good thing is there's nobody that's off the board that I want to make sure I have. So like if I don't have any Miles Turner, for example, it's not going to bother me, but I have a feeling I might want some. So like, for example, let's say in a build like this, let's say that I wanted to go up to Turner from here, right? If I went up to Turner from here, I'd have to save 1,000 So one way I could start is, well, first of all, I can go to Rozier again, right? So I can get up to Turner and then drop to Rozier. So that's one thing I could do. And then I'll put that in maybe, I don't know, 3 lineups. And we're continuing to kind of whittle things down and spread out our ownerships a little bit. So you could do this with an optimizer, obviously, also by setting ownership. But I really don't know how much I want of these guys. Okay, all these guys project kind of just, all very similarly. And I'm going to trying my best to have my strong opinions where they exist, and not dilute them with terrible opinions elsewhere. So I don't want to then say, well, boy, I really like Brogdon and Hayward. So to make that work, I'm going to have to go 100% Malik Monk, even though I don't love him all that much. That's one kind of common constant, is don't dilute a real strong opinion by including a really crappy one, okay, in just as many lineups. So again, you want to overweight your overweights, right? And then you want to separate out from them as you dilute, multiple lineups. So I think you see where I'm headed here with this. I'm going to do one more kind of thing. All right, so let's say, we did like Sabonis a lot, but let's see, what do we have right now? Right here we have Graham at 40%, or Rozier at 60%. All right, that's kind of fair enough. All right, do I ever want to do both of them in the same lineup? Probably not. Okay, what if I wanted to? Well, let's not do it with a 3. Let's do it with have someone as a 6. Let's say I wanted to take someone aside from Kemba as my point guard. It's got to be really tough. I mean, he projects so much better than these other guys. He might end up being a guy I just lock in. It's very possible. He might be a guy I lock in as opposed to Brogdon, who I might not lock in. Then again, Brogdon's ownership is so low. Boy, this is going to be a very difficult thing to not lock in some of these guys that I want. Let's say, just for the hell of it, that I got away from Brogdon here, and I put in Rozier instead, and then I went up to Simmons. The good thing is Simmons is projecting to really not be that good at all, which means his ownership is probably going to be kept somewhat in check. So that's one thing I could do if I wanted to not use Brogdon in every lineup, is do something like this. So let's put that in. Again, we're doing this non-scientifically. Let's put those in 2. Okay. Or do you want me to be scientific? Let's do it again. Let's put in, what did we say? We're going to put in, what are we putting over here? Rozier. And who are we going to put over here? Simmons. What's good about it is these are lineups without Embiid, so this works. So let's just put him in 1. So it's 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, and you see what I'm going to end up doing, right? I'm going to separate these 3 into 3, these 3, these 3, these 3, and then we're just going to let it roll. I hope that was at least an interesting way to look at these slates. And again, you got to pick what works for you, but I think that these are just kind of sound portfolio management ideas that will hopefully help you with all of your different contests. All right, that's it. I'll be back with the main slate thing, hopefully after some injury news breaks in a little bit.